Good afternoon, I'm Sonta Henderson. On behalf of Austin PBS and Leadership Austin, thank you for joining us for this ATX Together Engage series. It is all about transportation. Today's topic is moving Central Texans. Who's getting left behind and why won't we get out of our cars? Well, you know, everyone in Austin has opinions, especially in the entire Central Texas, about transportation, whether it's congestion on I-35, Capital Metro, city streets. People have opinions and ideas about what's going on or what should be going on. Well, we have some answers here today for you because we have some subject matter experts who can tell you all about the different organizations that they work with that involve mobility in Central Texas. So I will begin by introducing the panelists, and then I will allow them to tell you about their responsibilities of their respective organizations. We have Dottie Watkins, the CEO of CapMetro. We have Lorene Phillips, the board chair of Chariot, and we have Rudy Metayer. He is the Transportation Policy Board Vice Chair of the Capital Area Mobility Planning Organization, also known as CAMPO. Rudy is also a Pflugerville City Council member. So we welcome all of them to the stage today.
Thank you.
Okay, so Dottie, we'll begin with you. People in Austin are always talking about public transportation. And one of the things that they want to know is, what is the mission of CapMetro?
Yeah, so CapMetro is here to support and enable our community, to really empower our community to connect to jobs, school, recreation, all the great things that make living in this great region a wonderful thing. And so we do that through our public transportation service. We currently provide a robust bus network as well as a commuter rail line. We also have a Metro Access service, which is our service for people with disabilities. We provide the Central Austin bike share program, Metro Bike, in partnership with the City of Austin. We also have some neighborhood circulators we call pickup service. So we have lots of different types of services, but it's all about connecting people to opportunities to help them make sure that they have access to the places they need to go.
We'll definitely revisit some of those topics. And Lorene, if you could tell us more about Chariot.
Chariot is an organization that is volunteer run, and we provide rides to seniors 60 plus who need to get to doctor appointments, to the grocery store pre-pandemic, bingo halls, and other recreational activities that they wanted to go to churches, etc. So we provide that service based on volunteers. We have a couple of paid staff members, but the people who are responsible for transportation of seniors to these various activities are all volunteers.
Okay, I laugh, but I'm no stranger to a bingo hall. I'll be honest about that. Rudy, can you tell us more about the mission of CAMPO?
Okay, so what's cool to hear about what these wonderful women just said is talk about their different aspects and how it fits into a framework of we're talking about transit. You talked about, I laughed when you talked about why wouldn't we get out of our cars? Well, what you're hearing is that you're hearing a variety of different people trying to look at a multimodality when it comes to actual transit, and that's what CAMPO's about. We're a long-range planning organization who looks at the actual transit needs, transportation needs in the region. And when we talk about the region, we're not just talking about Travis County or Williamson County. We're also talking about Hayes, we're talking about Bastrop, we're talking about Caldwell, we're talking about Burnett. And so it's a 6-county region where you actually have the policymakers from all the different wards. It's 55,000 plus population. And we get together, and to be frank with you, we look at the whole totality of the board and try to see if we can and how we can make the difference in people's lives when it comes to transit.
Okay, great. Well, I have some questions that we've received from the community, so we'll go through these questions. I'll ask each of you. Some of them are specific to you, but of course, if you feel that you have follow-up or some information that the public needs to know, we welcome that you join in. So this first question is, what do you think is the reason people won't take public transportation? We'll start with Dottie and go down the panel.
The easy questions. Okay.
That's right, the easy one. I'll start with the fact that a lot of people do take public transportation, but recognizing that deep within that question is that there are a lot of people that don't. Why is that? And I think it is very much a matter of change. People don't like change. People like to do things their certain way. And we are still a culture here in Texas that's very car-centric. And so really trying to help people kind of change the way they live, think about where they live in relation to where they work or play. living in the center city and relying 100% on public transportation isn't going to be the right answer for everybody. But that doesn't mean that public transportation can't help them meet their needs. And so really kind of helping everybody see all of those bits and pieces. But I think it all comes down to people don't like to do things different.
Lorene, I know you may have a different take because you deal with senior drivers. What are some things you're hearing from them?
That first of all, traffic is a problem. Secondly, they are not as trusting as some of us may be to get in a car with a strange person that they do not know. Many of them have mobility issues that make it difficult if they're in a wheelchair or using a cane. They can't necessarily navigate some of the public transportation as easily as they can get into a car. We'll have a step stool as an example. And in the van, if we're taking multiple people. So there'll be a step stool and the driver will help them get into it. So part of that is their mobility and I think a bit of a trust factor, and they're not quite sure how this is going to work. And if you take them to a doctor's appointment, we get them back. And so public transportation may not be as synchronized as we are able to provide a service with the driver.
Okay.
So I think all of those are reasons why.
Rudy?
Well, the way you use the word synchronized on that, because I think that's quite apropos in our conversation here. It has to be easy for people to access. And to be frank, if you look at the growth of the region and just how explosive it's gotten, you can kind of understand why it's a patch quilt right there. CapMetro's done a tremendous job and wonderful job here in the Austin region, working toward, you have Round Rock and Georgetown's partner cities. But now you're having explosive growth everywhere. When you're looking at places like Bastrop that you're projected by 2045 to have a 245% of their population growth increase right there. You're looking at Burnett County. It's about 195% growth passing speeds. You're seeing all these different growths in these areas because we're used to people just working and playing, to be honest with you, in the central corridor. So the real question now is how are you able to leverage something like CapMetro to actually have access points around the region to make it easy for people to go to? If I was able to just go ahead and hop in my car, hop to a park and ride, maybe 3 or 4 blocks away from me right there, and just go ahead and take a train or a transit or a bus downtown, I would do that in a heartbeat because guess what? You get to do a lot of work and get everything else access and everything done with that. Once you make it easy for people to have different options, they're going to go ahead and adapt to it. We don't like change, but if you make it easy for them, it'll be much easier to put them in there.
Each of you talked about growth in these areas. So that's the next question. We talk about Bastrop County, which is born and raised in Bastrop, and I know that it's grown. Travis County is often on one of the fastest growing counties in the country. It's always on that list. So when we talk about more people, we mean congestion. So I think the study was showing that we spend like 104 hours a year in traffic, in congestion. So Dottie, I'll start with you to talk about congestion and how we can possibly look at ways to ease that or any initiatives that CapMetro may have.
Yes, so congestion is a headache. There's no getting around it. I am a native Austinite, so I've seen the growth. It is so different now than it was just a few years back when I was a kid. I think as we look at congestion, we have to look at what's causing that congestion and where are all of these people coming from and going to. And to Rudy's point, are we giving them options? Are we making it easy for them? One of the things that CapMetro tries to focus on is meeting people where they are kind of with their needs. So I mentioned we had all these different kinds of services. And one of the services that we really promote a lot is our commuter service. And so somebody like Rudy might be a good candidate for that. He needs to come downtown, he can park at a park and ride and come in on a train or a bus. And so I think a lot of it is helping people see that there is a good option, but then also having the infrastructure to support that. And I'll brag a little bit on some of our infrastructure. So when CTRMA, the Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority, built the toll lane, the express lane on Mopac, our commuter bus ridership increased 60% in 1 year. Because now all of a sudden, when all the cars were sitting in the traffic, the bus was in that express lane, and it was like, wait a second, now I want to how do I get on that thing, right? And so we have to continue to make those investments. And I know as TxDOT is looking to invest in I-35, they're looking at managed lanes as well. And so you have to have what we like to think of as transit supportive investments to help support the congestion relief.
Okay, Lorene?
I don't quite know how to answer that, but I'll tell you, the zip codes that we serve in Chariot are kind of in the southeastern part of the county. And one of the things we keep running into is people have been, because of all the growth and the explosive nature and the cost of housing, et cetera, have been forced to move out of the central area where they may have had access to the bus service that they don't have anymore when they move out to Bastrop, Manor, and all these other outs, even Cedar Park and Liberty Hill. As you move out that way, there may not be an easy way for you to get back in, right? And so that compounds this problem that we're having with how do we get people to where they need to be, as she said, that's convenient and that they will use, and. And so it's really tough as we try to figure out what is it that we're going to do, and should we, my organization as an example, how can we collaborate with other organizations that provide a similar service to help mitigate some of these issues? And so that's kind of where our head is at the moment.
Thank you. Rudy?
Yeah, I think along those lines, it's interesting because what you see is the fastest growth we often think is just in Travis, but actually it's going to be predicted 2045 from the surrounding regions. And I lament the fact when we act like we're unicorns, and this is a specific issue that, oh my goodness, Central Texas, we're the only people dealing with this. When you're looking at, the ability to actually affect traffic, you also need to see, okay, well, what can we do to not have people on the roads themselves? And I got to give CAMPO and Commissioner Bridget Shea a lot of credit on this. We talked about this even before the pandemic. What ways can we invest in where people can work remotely? This is before everyone even knew what the word Zoom was. And we were having a conversation, how do we keep them off the road so they don't have to do that? But that also goes into another discussion point, is regarding we can't talk in transit as if it's its own silo. We have to go and look at economic development. If we're looking at economic development, then surely we need to start looking around where are we having job nodes around the region? Because if you're able to have a good job working out in Burnett, Texas, as opposed to having to drive to downtown Austin from there as well, then you're going to be off the road and you're going to be able to provide for your family and work on that. And so when we look at economic development in tandem with transit, that makes a demonstrable difference in what we can do. When my parents moved down to North Texas back in 1986, we didn't move. My dad didn't have a job in Fort Worth or in Dallas. He had a job in Keller, Texas, which was about as podunk as all get out in 1986, but he had an engineering job. So that made a demonstrative difference about what his commute was, what he was able to do, your time in transit, and how we look at things. So those things have to be looked and paired.
If I can add on to something that Rudy just said, transportation isn't a silo. We can't talk about transportation policy without talking about land use policy. Because fundamentally, the transportation problem is how do I move people from point A to point B and from point B to point C? And if points A, B, and C are spread all over our nation, then your transportation problem is more difficult than if for a community, points A, B, and C can all be much closer, then you have a more simple transportation problem. You have less congestion, you have more transit supportive infrastructure. And so we have to look at what is causing our surrounding regions to grow, and are they prepared to help support that growth? And how do we as a region not just go, ooh, that's a problem for Burnett County, and really stop and go, well, we better help them, because otherwise we're going to have a whole bunch of people out there that need to get someplace and no way to do it because we've allowed that growth. And so we really do have to, it's one of the great things about CAMPO being such a regional organization. We have to all work together to understand how we all impact each other.
And I would just add that the senior population is one of the fastest growing populations. So you better get ready, because this whole gray tsunami, it's hit already. And I think that the problems that we are experiencing with trying to get seniors who no longer have access or have been, licenses have been removed from them, whatever, and not driving to where they need to go, or they've given them up voluntarily. And we find that more and more because of the traffic issues. People are throwing their license on the table and like, I can't do this. Yeah. And so this whole notion of a holistic approach, not just for working people, but for this growing population of elderly people.
And that's what's great about CAMPO, is that we're able to fund organizations like Chariot, like Senior Access, look at different aspects and modalities on how we actually meet people where they are And that's probably the key point for that. If we do that, I mean, to Dottie's point, that makes a demonstrable difference in what you're going to see regarding our own behaviors and aspects when it comes to transit, our approach to transit right there in general right there, as opposed to something that's seen as, oh my goodness, how are we going to solve that issue too? Hey, I'm excited to get on the road. Hey, I'm able to go from here, go from there as well. It's all in how we go working together.
Okay. Dottie, I wanted to ask you, I'd read something that said seniors are actually driving more also because you see a lot of seniors raising grandchildren.
Yes.
Taking care of their families.
Yes.
So can you speak to that and tell me if you've seen anything on
Yes,
that?
and so what you have in some cases is a sandwich generation, if you will. You have people who have young children and they're caring for their elderly parents. And so they're in the middle of this, right? And so they need to get to work, right? But grandma, great-grandma, whatever, needs to get to the doctor's office. So I may not be able to take time from my job, depending on what the issues are, that may require multiple visits during a week. I may or may not be able to do that. And of course, during the pandemic, people were working from home, et cetera. But, you know, once that was kind of not as intense, so you got these people that are kind of in this wedge.
Okay.
They got to take care of their children, and they're taking care of an elderly parent. So it's tough.
Okay. Thank you. So our next question, we'll start with you, Dottie. It's about CapMetro, and people want to know, why is it that they can get CapMetro in some suburbs, but they can't in others like Pflugerville?
Yeah, so CapMetro was created in 1985 after a vote by the region, and so the cities and communities, and in some places unincorporated portions of various counties, their residents voted that they wanted to contribute sales tax to a public transit authority. And that sort of defined how we were created. So a lot of folks who either weren't around or weren't big enough to feel like they needed it back then didn't vote in. And then some folks, like I'll pick on my friends in Pflugerville, later decided that they needed that sales tax for other very important city needs and voted out. And so no longer contribute to CapMetro, so we can't provide service directly to them without a different sort of agreement. And so we do have a process through which we will partner with our regional cities that aren't members of our service area, but it requires them to kind of work to come up with the funding. We've recently just concluded a year-long pilot in Pflugerville of our neighborhood pickup service, our neighborhood circulator service, that I think went well and helped us lay the groundwork for future public transit in Pflugerville. So never say never, but it's fundamentally really just a matter of who pays the sales tax and who doesn't.
Now, Rudy, to quote Dottie from earlier, what in the tarnation was Pflugerville thinking to opt out? Rudy is a Pflugerville City Council member, so do you hear from your constituents about CapMetro?
This is a great story, and this is why, remember we talked about experience with transit. So at the time when Pflugerville was in CapMetro, the mayor decided he'd take a trip down to downtown Austin, figure out how to do it. And he personally had such a hard time getting from there, transferring all the different buses, everything else right there. He came back to the council and said, hey, wait a minute. If it's hard for me to get down here, how are we going to surely go ahead and have our citizens do that? And keep in mind, at that point, you're having Pflugerville, let's see, in 1988, you probably had about 14,000 people, 15,000 people. Now you have 80 plus ETJ, so you have about 130, 145,000 people out there as well. So the opt-out was done specifically for that. Now, the reason why we came back with CapMetro to see about this is because we need to figure out what makes sense and what makes a demonstrative plan for it. I thought it was a phenomenal idea, and honestly, I think they did an excellent job with it, did regarding our pilot program. Now we're working with Uber, and we're trying to see Uber, okay, how does that work? Kind of like just what Kyle did as well. So it's been interesting to see about those different aspects. Ultimately, my personal opinion, it's going to have to be, crazy concept, multimodal in how we actually do about that. Something CapMetro, something from Uber, some of these different areas right there as well. But it's got to make sense, and you still got to include the senior population over here as well, you know, with places like Chariot and Senior Access doing that. So the question becomes is, from the citizen standpoint, what are they willing to spend their money on? Because, you know, one of the things that you brought up, which is right, is that we know the cost of living is not going to go down anytime soon. We used to talk about places like Pflugerville being affordable. It's no longer affordable. We need to actually have a real conversation about what we define by affordable. I say if you can find a house under $450,000, you grab it. But for how many people Is it reasonable to say, hey, you need to buy a house for $450,000? So, you know, you've heard a couple of times, the audience, you've heard that a couple of times when we're talking about all these issues with transit. I wish it was just transit. I wish we can just talk about it, but there's so many different other mechanisms in place that affect what we can do.
Okay, now you guys saw these questions coming in. We're getting them from the community as this broadcast is being shown. Now, here's one question is for CapMetro. Is there a plan for CapMetro to extend its services into the extraterritorial jurisdiction communities of Travis County?
So we actually have a partnership with Travis County for the areas that are outside of our service area. And so it's much like the relationship we had with Pflugerville, where we partner with the county to create a transportation development plan, help contribute kind of a share of our federal formula funding to help offset some of that cost, and then partner with the county to pay for the rest. We recognize that for most communities, they've already capped out their sales tax, and so for them to say, oh, we want to become a full member city would mean coming up with a way to spend, 10% less money on everything else, and that's really hard to do. So our board has developed this process for us to work with folks so that they can receive services without having to hold a vote and give up that penny. Because we just know that, especially for a lot of small towns, and as a growing town with 14,000 people, Pflugerville legitimately needed that penny to fund the city. But now that they're tenfold, that they need other solutions. And so it really is about making sure that we're ready to help. What's today's Pflugerville of yesteryear, and help them be ready to grow their community and support it down the road.
Okay, thank you. Rudy, I'll ask you this question, but of course, either of you can join in as well. People will fight to keep the roads from taking down a tree, but they don't seem frustrated by all the car emissions. So how do we manage that? How do we change that public opinion?
Well, that is a very Central Texas question, first of all, I'll say that. But in all sincerity, I think that we need to do a better job having these conversations, because that's something that we're well aware of. So, working with CapCog, CAMPO has worked specifically talking about, emission standards and what the emission standards are, even talking about PM 2.5 and seeing about what we can do to change that to make sure that we are able to take that smog and congestion off the roads and off in our environment. So you do have entities that are literally talk about this on a regular basis, work toward that, and have resolutions and solutions working together as a region for that. Interesting enough, for CAMPO, we just went ahead and we had another conversation about a study that we're about to do, where we're actually going to present to the federal government, one for the entire six-county region, so therefore we're able to have a better aspect, a holistic approach regarding when it comes to emissions. So no, trees and roads, I get that, but we do care about emissions as well.
Thank you. Dottie, go ahead, Lorene, I'm sorry.
I was just going to add a comment that it's not, emissions and that sort of thing is not unlike what Dottie said about we all want our cars. It seems that in Texas, if I could be so general, climate control, emissions, and all that stuff were not on anybody's radar, right? And we had people, I'm a tree hugger, so I'll give you that. But I do understand why Austin Energy needs to come and trim that line away, my tree away from that power line. And if you didn't get that after snowpocalypse and this most recent thing, there's something wrong in your head, right? Because you just have got to be aware that, these trucks that are rolling down big dual, what do you call them, dualies, rolling down the road, and there's black smoke flying out at the back end of it, it's affecting all of us. You breathe it, right? So I think it's a big deal, and I don't think we've come full circle with that or appreciate the impact of emission control.
Thank you, Lorene. So we'll move to our next question. Now, this is for you, Dottie, about CapMetro. Why does the train only go to one part of downtown, and then it might take me hours to get on the bus and go to the next
Now, it doesn't take hours to get on the bus, but so the Capital Metro currently runs one commuter line. Our commuter rail line we call it the Red Line. It runs from Lander into downtown Austin, serves 9 stations. And that line is actually built on existing freight rail tracks. And so where it's going is based on where the 100 years ago the freight rail needed to go. And so that really defines where it's going to go. Commuter rail is an important piece of how we connect our community, but it's not going to be the solution for everything. And so, under Project Connect, which is the transit expansion program that CapMetro and the City of Austin have partnered together to create the Austin Transit Partnership and help us build, we will look at adding a light rail network that will give us a spine of more high-capacity, frequent train service kind of through the center of the city. But our commuter rail service is really where they put the tracks 100 years ago. Okay. That's the short answer.
Lorene, well, since you deal with seniors, as she mentioned 100 years ago, the next question I want to tie in. Lorene, are we age?
I don't think you should take that. I'm an attorney. I know better than you.
When we talk about seniors and the train services and the mobility, have you heard from seniors? Do they have access? Do they use it at all?
No, not much. No,
Okay.
because of some of the things I mentioned before. Their condition may not be conducive for them getting, on a bus and making multiple, changing buses to get from point A to point B. So not very much. There's some areas of town that aren't so bad. I mean, you can get from point A to point B without having to change too many times, but yeah, so that's a factor that impacts seniors, their mobility, as well as kind of a trust factor.
Okay.
But along these lines, what you're hearing about this, though, is that you got to remember the mentality here for a long time was if you don't build it, they won't come. And so we're suffering because people were thinking, hey, no, we're going to stay small. We're just going to have the Capitol building, UT Tower, everything else, no skyline. I mean, we were going to stay in this small little area. And because no one could have experienced or thought about the growth. Now, growth you could have thought about, but the explosive amount of the growth, you're suffering from that and the consequences from that. And so as elected officials, it's incumbent on us to actually look toward the future of that. When Dottie was speaking, the first thing I thought about when you were talking about those train lines from 100 years ago is the story of Taylor versus Round Rock. So, over 100 years ago, Taylor was the biggest city in central Texas because guess what? It had the railways literally over there as well. And when the federal government came to them and said, hey, we want to put this thing called I-35, we want to make this by y'all, y'all big city, we want to be able to put something in there. They're like, no, we don't need that, we have the trains. So why don't you go put it, how about by that small little town called Round Rock instead right there as well. And that fundamentally shifted what you look at regarding the dynamics in the region. And so it's hard because we're having these conversations and we're thinking, okay, 5, 10, 20 years or so, we really need to look at 50 to 100 years. What are we looking at with these things? CapMetro has that, 2045 plan and the idea and looking at CAMPO and working with the region regarding these things, it's important to look that farther around. It doesn't have to look like what it does today, but we have to be able to have options to build on and have different modalities to adapt to what may come in the future.
Thank you. So this next question is for Dottie. Rudy mentioned the 2045 plan. You mentioned Project Connect. A lot of changes with CapMetro. Over the years, people have seen that. So one of the questions that we have is, what makes you better suited to shape the vision of CapMetro compared to your predecessors?
I think that's an unfair question. I will start with that. I think the better question, so I'm gonna repose your question and then answer it. I think the better question is what makes you the right person for right now.
Yes.
And I think as I look at my predecessors, they were all the right person for the moment when they came to our community. But I think where we are right now in public transit is about really growing up, right? Our city we are not a small town anymore. We aren't a university town anymore. We're not even just a university and tech town anymore, right? We're the 11th largest city in the nation. And so we need to have the robustness and the richness of public transit to support that. And so, having grown up in Austin, having grown up at CapMetro, I've been there for 28 years now, really understanding what it's going to take to firm those foundations and help us get to the next level, I think is what makes me the right choice for right now, because that's the moment we're in right now.
Absolutely. Thank you. Rudy, now we're moving on to CAMPO, and the question for you is there a regional vision for transportation, and if so, what is it? If not, are they crafting one?
So there's a regional vision, and the regional vision is truly, we've said it a couple of times, patch quilt, tapestry of different modalities when it comes to transit. People are going to want their cars and trucks. We're Texas. We know that. That's going to happen right there as well. People are going to want to have easy access to be able to have public transit. Makes sense. The sandwich generation is going to grow to the senior generation at some point, and they're going to want to be able to go ahead and have means and opportunities that you have through Uber and Lyft and Chariot and senior access, all these other things from door-to-door service, because that makes, or I'd say door-to-door, not just curb-to-curb service right there. That's a thing. And so for CAMPO, what we're looking at is looking at how all those things come into play right there as well. In this region, right now we have 22 policymakers on the board because it takes population 50,000 or more. That is expected to grow significantly over the next several years, just given the fact of what we're doing here in Central Texas. So the question is that how do we continue to work together? I think the best plan or best example of our planning is what's happening with I-35. It took all the different policymakers from all different areas to go ahead and sacrifice, the federal funds and the funds from TxDOT to make a difference to say, listen, I-35 is too important for our region. We have to fix this now. And so when you're able to come together and show that, hey, listen, this is important for us, this is important not just for our individual communities, but for the entire region, that's how you make a demonstrative difference in these transit needs and concerns, and that's how you help shape a vision that's not just for Burnett or Hayes or Bastrop, but for Central Texas.
Okay, Rudy, I'll continue with you. Now, this next question is about toll roads. And it's kind of a dual question here. So the question is, why do people want to continue to build toll roads, and can't we figure out a way to elevate a train or blast underground? Blast being their words, not mine.
All right, again, all these easy questions. I'd say this, and I don't know if any elected official has ever been as blunt as I'm going to be about this. There's only two ways to build roads, either through taxes or through tolls. And I'm fairly certain that a lot of people would not want us to just continue to have the congestion and the issues that we have over here without the opportunity to have the coal lane. We talk about what happened with MOPAC. That makes a significant difference in the morning when you're going north and south, or there are specific areas where you're working for that. When you're looking at 130, one of the things that, well, it's weird. Okay, so he was Mayor Watson at the time, then he became Senator Watson, now he's Mayor Watson again. So when Mayor Watson was talking about this back in the day, and 130 was built, people went after him completely. They said, what are you doing? We wasted all this money on a toll road that nobody's taken. He said, no, they're going to come. Now, even when 6 years ago I went down to the legislature and asked, TxDOT and those folks for another lane on 130, I should have asked for two. I mean, the way 130 is right there, that bypasses the demonstrative difference in what we're doing with things. Now, make no mistake, we're not just looking at tolls. One of the more interesting projects is that you're looking at, again, regional plan. That's what CAMPO is supposed to do, regional modalities. 973. We all know what's happening in Taylor. We all know what's happening with Samsung right there. 973 goes all the way down the corridor down there to 90, reaches Austin. What are we doing to make sure that that is another north-south corridor that we can utilize from that? And while we're talking about north-south corridors, we've got to talk about east-west, because that's another thing that we've got to make better arms and better aspects on that. I give a lot of credit to 183 in what's happened with 183. When I first came here 25 years ago, 183, you couldn't even get close to Cedar Park or Leander or anything like that on 183. Now you're able to take it and do a complete bypass down to San Marcos and Buda and all those specific areas, thanks to 183 in that.
Okay, I got some questions coming in. So Dallas County. Dallas has built roads under roads and roads over roads. Why can't we do the same?
So I'm trying to think of a nice way to answer this.
We don't have a capital.
You've had a very, I'd say, Tupac and Biggie, Hatfields, McCoys relationship when it came to transit and transit dollars and people working together here in Central Texas for a long time. Just being honest with you. And if you don't play well in the same sandbox, guess what? when people come out and they want to give dollars or support different projects, they're like, oh, okay, you look Jerry Springer. No, we'll go give it to someone else who's acting right about that. The North Texas COG has done a phenomenal job working together to get those dollars right there. And this is what's happening. I really do think 35 is the impetus to see true regional agreement and working together here in Central Texas, because we're not unicorns in that. Now, that's the second time you've mentioned burying underneath. All I can say right now is stay tuned.
Okay. Well, you mentioned 35, so I'll ask this question. We built 45 to get all the big trucks off of I-35, but it doesn't seem to work. So what do we learn from that?
We need more roads. No, in all sincerity, I mean, I remember when 45 opened up. I think it was 2006 or so. It was when 45 opened up, and we started talking about some of these bypass ways to go ahead and deal with these aspects. It's different. Like if you're from a different part of the country, you know that trucks, 18-wheelers, have their own dedicated roads and lanes. We don't have that here in Texas. We don't have it retrofitted either with that. I think the biggest thing that we can look at is trying to see about how we can, again, offer different modalities and streamline some of those traffic corridors. Because one of the things that's going to come online, which sounds crazy, but it's true, is next year you're going to start to see a lot of those 18-wheelers, autonomous vehicles driving around out there. You have them right now driving with somebody in this, behind the seat just in case anything happens. You're going to have that transfer from that. And because that's happening, and that's going to happen on our major corridors and roadways, we've got to be prepared for that. Because people are complaining about the traffic congestion that happen now. What happens when you actually become autonomous and they're remote controlling these things?
Okay, we're not picking on Rudy, but here's another question. How come we don't have HOV lanes?
Oh, I'm trying to think of a PC, non-political answer to that. It's not for the lack of trying. I'll just say that. I'll just leave it at that. Whoever said that, it's not for the lack of trying.
Thank you. So next question for CapMetro and CAMPO. We'll start with Dottie, though, this time. How can we get, Rudy talked about all these different things, different modalities and things of that nature. So how can we get the buy-in to your initiatives from all the different communities that are affected?
I think the most important thing is you have to talk to them. You have to talk to all the people in the community, and every community, every neighborhood, every little section of a neighborhood all have different needs. And so you have to understand their needs. We're not going to be able to solve everybody's problems. We're not going to be everybody's everything. I wish I could put her out of business, right? Like I wish that I had the ability to say, we don't need y'all, we got this covered. But we know that we're not going to be able to do that we all have to work together. But for it to all work, you have to understand what people's issues are and really listen to them. Not sell them, this is my initiative, but listen to their problems and then go, okay, this will or won't help that. Yeah, let me go tell them about this thing because this will help. And so I do think that buy-in comes from starting early and constantly working with folks. And it's one of the things that in the last number of years CapMetro has really leaned in on. Yeah, is talking to people, right? Standing out of the bus stop, knocking on doors in the neighborhood and saying, hey, do you know about this thing? Let me tell you about this thing. Let me leave you a flyer so that you can know about this thing. I mean, really just making sure that it's not just the people who will come downtown for a public meeting at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday or log into Zoom. Thank God for Zoom, right? Yeah. Public meetings have never been easier. But still, not everybody will do that. But it's the whole community that we're really listening to, because if we don't listen to the whole community, then we won't be able to meet their needs.
Okay. I just want to say amen to that.
All right.
And, from a selfish senior access perspective, I think that is extremely critical, and especially as we go forward and try to figure this out. You cannot leave out a huge growing segment of the population. We have got somehow, and I don't know what the answer is, but somehow we have to weave everybody into this discussion so that we come out with a better outcome, because it's not a single answer. To Dottie's point.
Rudy, you mentioned, new roads, tolls, or taxes. So, how hard is it to talk when you talk to people about these initiatives?
Yeah, I know you see, like, I think as policymakers, we do a bad job of just distilling things for people. I think we try to sugarcoat things. We try to do that. I think we just got to have a real conversation. for one mile stretch, of roadway, just 1 mile, you're looking at, I don't know, $1.5, $2 million. That's what you're doing. And this is not even including inflation. Lord knows what we're going to pay now because of inflation, the cost from that as well. That's a lot of money. All these things take money. And, when we talk about transit over here, and we talked about what happened with Pflugerville, for example, I'm glad they were able to opt out because of the economic development benefits that behoove the community from that. But now we're at a point now where we go, okay, listen, now we're having transit issues. What do we do to solve those things? And it's going to cost money. The question is truly about what citizens are willing to do and allocate from that as well. Nobody wants to raise taxes. Lord knows, we've worked hard, every elected official, Lord knows, about trying to make sure that we actually understand those things, because we all suffer the same thing. We understand that. So how do we make it a demonstrative difference in these issues? Now, I'll be blunt again. You're looking down at the Capitol right now, that pink dome right now, you have what, $33 billion, access funds right there as well. How much can we have and utilize to go ahead and help pay down some of the tax burden of these citizens? And if you really want to do that, school finance formula, we're not talking about that here today, but nonetheless. Yeah. But, what are we doing for that so the burden isn't just on the local communities? Because right now, the burden is on the local communities to provide these services, to provide this infrastructure, provide these roadways, provide these traffic signals. This is what they're doing. It's great to have partnerships with people like TxDOT, CAMPO, CapMetro, a variety of other things to make that happen. But that's what the elected officials are looking at. So the citizens, when we come to you about, hey, we want to do this road project, it's going to cost X amount of money because of bonds. We're not doing that just because, we're sadomasochists, we just love building everywhere. We're truly trying to improve people's lives. Now the question becomes is that when you are making those decisions, how do we make it as best as possible to make sure that the effect it has on each and every one of you, the benefit outweighs the hurt?
Right, thank you. So Lorene, this next question, it's a dual question for you. Is a driver senior meeting the need or only scratching the surface for seniors? And what is the best way for the community to support senior services for senior drivers?
Bingo. So I'll save the second part of the answer. I think we are meeting a need. Are we scratching the surface? Yes. But we are meeting a need and servicing those people who have the requirement. Now, is it enough? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And so we are constantly scratching and clawing for grants and donors and all of that stuff to keep us going with the services that we provide. Is it scratching the surface? I am not going to sit here and act like it is because I know that it's not. We have, I don't know, a couple of hundred volunteers now. This time 2 years ago, we had over 600. So the effects of COVID and that pandemic hit us very, very hard because we just are down with the number of volunteers who drive and all that stuff. Second part?
You've answered it, actually. So I want to move on to, you mentioned the volunteers. So tell people what these volunteers do for your program.
Okay, so if you want to volunteer, go to the website, sign up, or just give us a call if you don't know how to use a computer. And what you will do is we have people who register for the rides, and they'll say, this is my name, this is where I live, I need to get to Seton, Maine on Tuesday for a 9 o'clock appointment. And I, as a volunteer, look at that and decide if I can fit that into my schedule. And if so, I make the connection, make the contact with the person to say, this is who I am, I will be picking you up at whatever, and taking you to your appointment. So that's how you do it. So if you want to volunteer, it's a pretty simple process. We need lots of volunteers to keep us going. Now, we've had to use some alternative transportation solutions like Uber and Lyft because we were down with volunteers. Cinderide is another one. But part of our mission is the relationship that happens with the person. So it's not just a pick you up, drop you off. Sometimes relationships are formed out of that because you remind me of my grandmother or whatever. And so that's been we've had to use other means to get people to their appointments. So it's volunteers plus the other paid services that we have. And obviously, if we're paying for that service, that affects other services that we're able to do. So it's need volunteers.
Thank you so much. So this next question is for each of you. And why does it take so long to solve our transportation problems? Other metro areas have been in a solid state of building, and we always seem like we're just getting started. I'll start with Dottie.
It's not for lack of trying, right? I think that we are a very involved community, and it is something that is part of what makes Austin and Central Texas a great place to live. But it also means that sometimes we will, fight good because we really wanted great, and it's like sometimes perfect is the enemy of good enough. And so we've really kind of gotten ourselves in that cycle. I think we have grown up past that. We are in a place where we've said, no, that's not how we're going to behave. And I'll point toward in 2020, November of 2020, we had a tax rate election passed to fund public transit, but there have been a number of bond initiatives. I think our community understands, okay, we've got to take the time and invest. So I think we're past that. But as Rudy said, for a long time, we really just wanted to talk about it a little bit longer and contemplate it a little bit more. So I think, sometimes you got to just do a thing and then hope for the best. And so hopefully we're willing to do a little bit of that.
Rudy?
Can I say ditto, Dottie? In all sincerity, I mean, we've treated ourselves like a unicorn when it's just preposterous. It just is. It's ridiculous to think that we're just so different from any other region with that as well. It's getting folks together, putting egos aside, and working on different issues. I think one of the fundamental changes that have happened too is that you used to have urban, Austin, everything else rural. Now that rural is changing substantially to urban. And so the commonalities and the issues that weren't up front before are now becoming apparent in places like Buda, in places like Caldwell. I mean, that's a significant mind shift. And how looking at things, hey, listen, that's an Austin problem. Good Lord, good luck to them. And it's like, oh, wait, we've got the same issue right here now. What are we going to do about this as well? And because of that mindset, you'll have a better collaboration with people. It's been also a hardship for Austin too as well, because you're used to having, hey, listen, okay, we're running the show, we're doing all the issues, and now it's like, oh wait, we've got to work with each other to go ahead and get things from there. I think it was absolutely phenomenal to see what Austin just did regarding that partnership for directly with the Department of Transportation right there. I think that's going to be interesting. That's innovative. It's a way to go ahead and get your tax dollars down here, because again, I always remind citizens that tax dollars in DC are still your tax dollars, so we want them spent down here from that as well. So I really do believe, Dottie's right, that you're going to see a much better collaboration in these issues, because these issues are becoming everyone's issues, not just one person or one city or entity's issues.
Okay. Anything to add, Lorene, at all?
Ditto.
Ditto?
But I do think that we have come to the realization that we are not a silo. And, while I may disagree with something, is it for the greater good? And if the pandemic didn't teach us anything, it should have taught us that we need each other. And we have to work together to solve these problems. It's not just her problem, it's not just his problem, it's our regional problem, because of all the dynamics and the people and all the issues that come with the growth. And, oh, by the way, comes as a surprise, you cannot have it both ways. You cannot say you want growth and you don't even begin to understand, or you act like you don't understand, all of the issues that come with that growth.
We need to take you out and talk.
Right. Sign her up. Okay, thank you. So, and you guys have touched on this a bit, but one of the questions is, many Austinites feel that we are too late trying to fix I-35, and we always play catch up. What can be done to ease their concerns?
I mean, they're not wrong.
They're not wrong.
I mean, they're not wrong. And what's happening right now is trying to go ahead and address the issue, and then also not just address it for, because the project's going to take I don't know if y'all know, it's going to take like a while, but it's going to be worth it. But we don't just look at what it's going to look like in, let's say, 2033. What's it going to look like in 2043, 2053? Try to be further along on these things from there. I got to give TxDOT, we give them a lot of, crap for a variety of different things, but all in sincerity, Tucker Ferguson and those folks have been phenomenal partners, and they are, you're going to hear soon enough, they're thinking of very innovative ways to address these issues. And I think that when you start to hear what they have in mind, and these projects aren't 10, 15 years out, they're 2, 3 years out, you're going to start to say, oh, wait a minute, we really are looking at our transit needs in a different way from right there as well. Because make no mistake, again, we all understand that. I mean, the lament and everything else, when I first came on campus here in 1998 and just seeing what's happened here, since then, it's tremendous. But I truly believe that you do have people who are tremendous in themselves. The policymakers are stepping up to saying, we're going to address this. We're not going to kick the can down the road anymore. We're going to address this head on and not just plan for the next 5 to 10 years, for 25, 50 years.
Thank you. Next question is, how does transportation policy address the historical disparity that placed highways like 183 disproportionately in minority communities?
Oh, well, let's be blunt. They mentioned 183. Okay, when I came down here 25 years ago, East Austin is not the East Austin you have right now. You have the black and brown folks who lived over in East Austin were pushed across 183. I'm laughing that we're having the conversation about 183. Yeah. You would never even thought of that. It was already the 35 divide. Mm-hmm. And you were like, no, listen, okay. I remember being on campus and saying, that's weird, particularly from DFW area. I was like, why are all the Hispanic people? I was like, that's weird. I'm on campus over here. Then I go to the east side. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. You literally have people who have been segmented because of systemic racism, systemic means put in places right over here on this side. Come to find, now that you're pushing people across 183, I mean, that was about as Timbuktu, out there. And so no one's not aware of what's gentrification, those issues that come from that. You should not have to move for your community to get better. You need to be able to go ahead and work in tangent so those folks who truly were there, who have historic roots, who have been there for a long, long time, are benefiting from, honestly, the prosperity that we have over here. But make no mistake, let's be honest. We have two different societies going on at the same time. Remember, this area, you have one of the most prosperous regions in the country, and then you have one of the poorest regions as well with folks right there. And they're having two different experiences in Central Texas at the same time. How do we address that and make sure that their issues are addressed in a manner that's not only dignified but respectful of what's happened before, not of their own volition, and make sure they're able to go ahead and increase and prepare in this prosperity?
Thank you for that information, Rudy. So we have a final question we'll get to each of you, and is, what is your takeaway? What do you want the community to know about the efforts of your respective organizations? And I'll begin with you, Dottie.
All right. I mean, I would say that, and we've talked about it a lot here, we're all in this together, right? There's no one entity that's going to solve all of the problems for everyone. There's no one policy that's going to solve all of the problems for everyone, and that we have to keep working together. We have to work together on transportation, on land use, on housing, on access to food, on access to medical appointments. We have to work all of those angles at the same time. And I think that because we're a growing region, and as we really do grow up, we have to be able to say, hey, how can I contribute to this bigger thing, and how can we become greater together than we are apart? And so I think that's really where we're headed.
Lorene?
So I would echo that and say that I think we're going to have to continue to work together to solve some of these issues and make sure that we have some understanding of what the impact of some of these decisions, the impact is of some of the decisions that we're making. And I think, politicians, non-politicians, volunteers, and all of us have to be engaged with that and go figure out, get in a room or wherever and figure out and it may be a small thing. It may be a very, very small thing, but sometimes that's what it takes to ignite the fire. You just need one small success, and then that becomes, gets blown up and other people subscribe to it, et cetera. So I think the takeaway for my organization is that, we recognize that it's a huge segment of the population, and there's that tsunami that's coming down the road, so get ready.
Gray tsunami, folks. Yeah, Rudy?
I'd say equity. You know, I think that when you look at these issues, most people, when they think of equity, they just think of as opposed to race or culture. No, that's not necessarily the case. That goes to income status, that comes, you know, veterans, senior populations, you know, various different treatments. I mean, how are we making sure that every voice is at the table? How are we making sure that all the different concerns or issues are being heard in a fashion where that can be addressed in a way that makes a demonstrative difference? And when you look at places places like where we live right now, you see people who are on the rise who are aware of that, hey, listen, what's happening in Smithville affects what's happening in Leander. I need to figure out what's going on in Liberty Hill because that's affected me in Georgetown. Hey, guess what? That thing's happening in Lockhart. That's affecting Pflugerville. We're looking at different ways and truly looking at it from an equity standpoint to make sure that these issues are heard at a level where they can be addressed at a level with the means and the ability to do so. We have an opportunity to go ahead and right a lot of the wrongs that happened before with that. We can't go ahead and fix what happened before. We hear you, we understand that. What we can do is moving forward is trying to make sure that we work together as a region to truly address the issues that affect our citizens. Our citizens don't just stay in one city or one county. They drive all through it right there as well. We need to make sure we treat our issues as our issues holistically for the entire place.
Thank you. Well, that was certainly an informative discussion. We wanted to say thank you to Dottie Watkins with CapMetro, Lorene Phillips with Chariot, and Rudy Metayer for CAMPO. On behalf of Austin PBS and Leadership Austin, I'm Sonta Henderson, and we want to remind you that whether it's taking a bike, driving down 35, 183, or catching a bus, be safe and think about all the things you've heard here today to help everyone with mobility in Central Texas. Good day.